So I'm especially thrilled to welcome you here tonight on the first night of our fall event season. Tonight is also the first of the Storyteller series, where we bring authors and actors together to dive into the language and story of new works of fiction. We're deeply honored to have Sir Salman Rushdie here with us to launch his Booker Prize shortlisted novel, Quichotte. Yeah. He is a master storyteller at the height of his power, and we could not have wished for a better script nor a better cast to help him read. Their bios are all in the program, but you know them all from their excellent work. Please help me welcome to the stage Sir Salman Rushdie, Joan Allen, Akhtar, and Aasif Mandvi.
All right. Thanks for coming, and thanks to these folks for coming to help me out. It's actually a much more enjoyable way to launch a book than having just to answer questions, although I hope you'll have some questions later on, and then I can do that too. So I'm just going to say 2 minutes worth about what this is about, and then we have a number of readings, which I'll try and set up each one briefly. But in general, the novel has something to do with Don Quixote. Not, in fact, as much as you'd think, because even though obviously the idea of having an old fool and a younger sidekick setting off across America has something to do, it comes from Cervantes. The journey they make has no relationship to what he was writing about. It's a different journey, and has more to do with now than then. And what I thought, just the thing that I wanted to have was the thing that I liked about the Knight of the Dolorous Countenance is that he's, in a funny way, as well as being an old fool, he's also oddly kind of noble. And that combination of delusion and nobility is very attractive. My character is actually sweeter than him. He's more optimistic and hopeful. And I really wanted that. I wanted to have somebody full of hope and belief and optimism, and push him on this journey across a country which may not be at its most hopeful and optimistic moment, and see what that connection, what that contrast did. So it's a bit of it's a road novel. The bits we're going to read, what he does is he's obsessed with terrible television, and in the way of people who watch too much terrible television, he begins to believe that he knows the people on the other side of the screen, and he falls in love, what he calls falling in love, with a daytime TV talk show host called Salma R, a person whose name differs from mine by one letter. I always thought I should be a talk show host with bipolar problems and an opioid addiction. And I thought that's the autobiographical character. Anyway, so he sets out on this quest to be worthy of her. And that's the sort of main narrative line of the book. And there's a second narrative line in which another character who turns out to be the author of the first narrative line is working out his own problems by writing this story. So the two stories, the story of the author and the creator and the created, kind of alternate in the book and gradually I hope, sort of merge. Anyway, that's enough. So he writes when he's on the road. He adopts his name is Ismail Smile. That's his real name, and Smile is an Americanization of Ismail. So he's really called Ismail or Smile. But when he starts to write to her, he's smart enough. He's not crazy. He's not so crazy as to use his real name because he worries that, you know, the police might get involved. So he invents for himself the pseudonym Quichotte, and the reason he uses the French version is that he is an admirer of the opera Don Quixote, written by Jules Massenet, which is a French opera based loosely on Don Quixote, and as he says, as his alternative self says to him, you're a little loosely based yourself. So that's why Quichotte and not Quixote, although just about the pronunciation, in the Spanish of the time of Cervantes, the X would have been pronounced as a sh. So Cervantes would probably have said Quichotte. Never mind all that. Anyway, he starts writing her these love letters from the road under this pseudonym. And even though they're clearly borderline stalkerish, she's kind of intrigued. So let's do the first one. Yeah.
Very, very occasionally, a letter which was not like the others, like an odd one out category on Sesame Street, arrived. And when this happened, Miss Salma R., perhaps only for a moment, gave the thing her full attention. The first letter from the person signing himself Quichotte was one such missive. The thing that leapt out at Miss Salma R. immediately was the beautiful penmanship. The pen that wrote these words was a thick-nibbed instrument, a pen to respect, which allowed the author to create perfect copperplate lettering as if he were making a wedding announcement or inviting her to a debutante ball. The text, too, was unusual. It was one of the rare love letters that were neither bombastic nor wheedling, and it made no assumptions about her.
My dear Miss Salma R., with this note, I introduce myself to you. With this hand, I declare my love. In time to come, as I move ever closer, you will come to see that I am true and that you must be mine. You are my grail, and this is my quest. I bow my head before your beauty. I am and will ever remain your knight, sent by a smile, Quichotte.
The paper on which this message was written in such a fine hand was the vulgar antithesis of the writing, a cheap motel room scrap with the address torn off. From these few clues, Miss Salma R. deduced that this was an older man, a man from the age of handwriting, the owner of a good fountain pen, who had fallen upon hard times and, being lonely, watched too much TV. From his choice of alias, she further deduced an education, which in all probability, judging by the phrasing, had not been American schooling. She even went so far as to surmise that the writer had this in common with herself, that English had not been his mother tongue, not something heard in the cradle, but something learned afterwards. This was suggested by both the syntax. American English was far more informal in its construction, and the spelling, which was improbably perfect. The only puzzlement was the sign-off sent by a smile. With its imperfect command of English grammar, it would have both gratified and shocked our fool of a protagonist to know that these 72 words, 73, including his pseudonymous signature, which he believed preserved around him the cloak of invisibility, within which for the moment he preferred to remain concealed, had revealed so much about him. She had noticed him and was focused on his letter. That was good.
So meanwhile, he's on the road in his beaten-up Chevy Cruze, and he has acquired by magical methods a teenage son, fully formed as a teenage son, who arrives by magic in the passenger seat of the car. And initially, he's not fully formed because he's only in black and white. He gradually moves into full color as he acquires more and more humanity. And there's a point at which they're discussing the wooing of Miss Salma R. And goes like this. This is their conversation about how to woo. When considering the matter of wooing a great lady, Quichotte said, I ponder naturally the classics. And by the classics, I mean, first of all, the show that broke the ground and pointed the way, the dating game. ABC TV 1965, from Hollywood, the dating capital of the world. We must ask ourselves, when we summon up the memory of a masterpiece, what is the wisdom it offers us?
That we shouldn't go on dumb dating shows? Proposed Sancho unhelpfully.
Incorrect, Quichotte admonished him not unkindly, for Sancho was only recently arrived in the world, and so it was understandable that he would get things wrong when he sought to judge its ways. Listen and learn, my boy. Prolonged viewing of this seminal program, which originally ran on daytime television in black and white, but soon burst into full color on prime time, drives home some hard truths to the attentive viewer. Firstly, that when a woman possessed of a high degree of desirability is the goal, you will have competitors. The field will not be open to you. You will have to chop down your adversaries ruthlessly in order to achieve your end.
That sounds good, Sancho said. Chopping people down. Who are our targets and how and when do we waste them?
Secondly, continued Quichotte, ignoring his miracle child's pseudo-adolescent arousal by the suggestion of violence, she will question you, and you had better have the noblest answers to her questions, for she will question others as well. Love is an audition, Sancho. He who knows best how to present himself to the beloved gets the part.
How do you think you're going to do that? The youth disrespectfully rejoined. Broken down old nag like you?
Be a little less obnoxious to your parent, Quichotte reproved him. I brought you into existence by the power of my wishing and the kindness of the stars, and if I grow weary of you, I can make you vanish as well.
Too late for that, said Sancho. Once you're born, you're born. That's all there is to it. By whatever means you arrive, you've arrived. After that, you're the boss of yourself and responsible only to yourself. Responsibility for your own actions. That's the basis of all morality, isn't it? The do-gooder gets the credit for the good deed. The murderer is guilty of the crime.
We aren't discussing morality, said Quichotte. We are discussing love.
Sancho, who had been slumped down in the passenger seat of the car, filled with the indifference of his apparent years, abruptly sat up and clapped his hands. Okay then, he cried, let's play. I'll be the girl on one side of the wall, and you'll be the contestant on the other side. Contestant 1, let's see how you do with my questions.
What about the other contestants? Quichotte asked.
Don't worry, Sancho replied. I'll be them as well. Question 1, Sancho said. And I'm the lady, remember. I can't see you, you can't see me, there's a wall.
Pyramus and Thisbe, Quichotte said.
What?
It doesn't matter.
Please don't interrupt anymore, Sancho said with a shrug, and then raised his voice to sound feminine. Here's question 1. I'm a woman who likes my men tall, dark, and handsome, with strong jaws and a dominant attitude. How do I know you're my kind of guy? Contestant 3? Now he deepened his voice and answered himself. Just wait until I get you in my arms, baby. You won't be disappointed. And then again, as the lady. How about you, contestant 1?
By the height of my emotion toward you will you know me, Quichotte cried out in high rhetorical fashion, and by the darkness in which I dream of you, and by the handsomeness of the deeds by which I will prove myself, for handsome is as handsome does, and by the determined set of my jaw as I bend the arc of my life toward you, and by the dominant idea which possesses me, which is that you must be mine.
Sancho let out a low whistle. Wow, Dad, he said. I guess I underestimated you. It was the first time he had used the word dad and meant it.
Quichotte nodded gravely. A good knowledge of the classics, he advised his son, is the sign of an educated man. So, yeah, we come back to the love letters. There's the next love letter.
All right. The second letter from Quichotte unexpectedly touched the heart of Salma R., or even Salma. We have gotten to know her well enough by now to drop the formality of Miss.
I am a sleepwalker, walking as if through a dream, until I awake into the reality of our love.
It began and continued through several pages of increasingly purple expressions of adoration. And again, at the end, the oddly ungrammatical sign-off, a peculiarity at the end of a linguistically competent, if overly baroque, piece of writing.
Sent by a smile. Quichotte.
I'm still worried about him, she told her security chief, because it goes without saying that stalkers, like groupies, are 100% always and absolutely out of their minds. But the man has a turn of phrase. And the metaphysical aspect of the letter, the surrender of all vestiges of belief, but also of the processes of un- or disbelief, so that one might simply face reality with an open heart and receive its messages, was not without interest. It may be that one reason why Salma responded as emotionally as she did to the second letter from Quichotte is that she was herself all too familiar with the battle against mental illness, being a third-generation sufferer herself. For a long time after the family plague manifested itself in her, it was strong medication that kept her going, so much so that she made up a rhyme about it and even recited the rhyme on her show where she was open about the ecstatic disorder of her brain. It's lithium and Haldol and lithium, she chanted in front of her laughing studio audience, and then got them all to sing along. Can't do without those pals, doll, so I'll just live with-ium. She had to get used to the word bipolarity because both her mother and grandmother had called it manic depression. And so manic depression felt like the right term for what she had inherited from them. The dangerous darkness sitting every day and every night in the corner of one eye and the blinding brightness in the corner of the other one. The meds that had controlled the monster within, just about, the meds had controlled the monster within just about. But there were bad moments, such as when during a trip to San Francisco, the elevated mood, the hypomania seized hold of her, and she started running around town buying a slew of expensive artworks. An ancient wooden mask from Cameroon, a set of rare pornographic ukiyo-e drawings from Japan, and a small late Cezanne, which her young assistant, who also occasionally her lover, had to return to the galleries later that evening after explaining her condition to them delicately when she wasn't listening. After this episode, her attending health professionals had expressed concern that her condition might be becoming treatment resistant and suggested the possibility of electroconvulsive therapy, ECT. Shock treatment? You want me to have therapy by voltage, she demanded, but my dears, don't you know by now that I am unshockable? Nevertheless, she acquiesced. She had to come off the lithium, the health professional said, because it would be toxic in combination with the juice. Well, that ruins a good song, she told them. When she awoke from the first treatment, her first words were, "So, that felt exceptionally good." And I suppose I should have asked this before, but are there any side effects that I should worry about?
You may experience some temporary confusion, her senior health professional replied.
Darling, how will anyone be able to tell the difference?
And there may be some temporary, or in some cases, permanent memory loss.
She said. So I suppose I should have asked this before, but are there any side effects that I should worry about?
So this next bit moves into the first person voice of Sancho, the imaginary child, becoming real. And he's trying to understand things with some difficulty.
I'm new here. I'm trying to understand how the world works. His world, the only one available to me. The world according to Quichotte. I'm trying to get a sense of the normal, but it keeps dissolving around me. On TV, because having no option, I'm watching a lot of TV myself now. Everybody seems to know what normal is, and at the same time, nobody agrees. I'm using the remote to find out. Is this what's normal, I ask him? A couch in a living room with a staircase behind it and an armchair to the side, and a father in the armchair, and a mom in the kitchen, and teenage children rushing in and out, wanting sandwiches and quarreling, but every 30 minutes, minus commercials, there's a group hug.
Yes, he says, life is like this for normal people.
Or, I say, is normal a couch in a living room with a staircase behind it and an armchair to the side and a loud woman's big comeback killed by a tweet referencing Muslim Brotherhood and Planet of the Apes?
That's a less normal, he says.
Normal doesn't feel so normal to me, I tell him.
It's normal to feel that way, he replies.
This is what I get instead of fatherly wisdom. Meanwhile, things fall apart as well as people. Countries fall apart as well as their citizens. A zillion channels and nothing to hold them together. Garbage out there and great stuff out there too, and they both coexist at the same level of reality. Both give off the same air of authority. How's a young person supposed to tell them apart? How to discriminate? Every show on every network tells you the same thing, based upon a true story, but that's not true. But that's not true either. The true story is there's no true story anymore. There's no true anymore that anyone can agree on. There's a headache beginning in here. Boom! Here it is. Ow! What a time for me to arrive. I'm beginning to understand why people get religion. Just to have something solid that doesn't change into a slippery snake without a word of warning. Something eternal. How comforting when you can't trust yourself. How comforting when you can't trust yourself to wake up in the same town you went to sleep in. Metamorphosis is frightening. Revolutions end up killing more people than the regimes they overthrew. A change is not as good as a rest. I don't know how many people there are out there who have started seeing what I'm seeing, experiencing what I'm experiencing, but I bet I'm not the only one. In which case, there are a lot of frightened people out there. A lot of terrified visionaries. Even the prophets, when visions started talking to them, at first thought they were going mad. He's frightened too, Daddy Q. After Lake Capote, something happened to that innocent trust in people he always had. Maybe things haven't fully come apart for him, not yet, but I know he's shaken. Let's see how he goes forward. If he does, I'm watching him. Also, I'm going to start looking out for those people, the ones like me, with the end time in their eyes.
This last piece is about the other storyline. This is about the storyline of the author who has written everything that you've just heard, who is a second-rate spy. I always wanted to be a second-rate spy novelist. and I finally achieved my goal. Anyway, he's a second-rate spy novelist who has decided, since his books aren't doing that well, to try something completely different, and as a result is writing this very strange story about Quichotte, while meanwhile trying to work out his own issues. So this is an introduction to him.
Chapter 2. An author, Sam Duchamp, reflects upon his past and enters new territory. The author of the preceding narrative, we will call him Brother, was a New York-based writer of Indian origin who had previously written 8 modestly unsuccessful spy fictions under the pen name of Sam Duchamp. Then, in a surprising change of direction, he conceived the idea of telling the story of the lunatic Quichotte and his doomed pursuit of the gorgeous Miss Salma R in a book radically unlike any other he had ever attempted. But no sooner had he conceived this idea than he became afraid of it. He could not at first fathom how such an eccentric notion had lodged in his brain and why it insisted so vehemently on being written that he had no choice but to start to work. Then, as he thought about it further, he began to understand that in some fashion that he did not quite as yet fully grasp, Quichotte, the loner in search of love, The loser nobody who believed himself capable of winning the heart of a queen had been with him his whole life, a shadow self. He had glimpsed from time to time in the corner of his eye, but had not had the courage to confront. Instead, he had written his commonplace fictions of the secret world disguised as someone else. He now saw that this had been a way of avoiding the story that revealed itself to him in the mirror every day, if only in the corner of his eye. His next thought was even more alarming. To make sense of the life of the strange man in whose latter days he was setting out to chronicle, he would have to reveal himself alongside his subject, for the tale and the teller were yoked together by race, place, generation, and circumstance. Perhaps this bizarre story was a metamorphosed version of his own. Quichotte himself might say, if he were aware of Brother, which is impossible naturally, that in fact the writer's tale was the altered version of his history rather than the other way around, and might have argued that his imaginary life added up to the more authentic narrative of the two. If Quichotte had been driven mad by his desire for the people behind the TV screen, then he, Brother, had perhaps also been deranged by proximity to another veiled reality in which nothing was reliable, treachery was everywhere, identities were slippery and mutable, democracy was corruptible, the two-faced double agent and the three-faced triple agent were everyday monsters, love placed the loved one in danger, allies could not be trusted, information was as often fool's gold as golden, and patriotism was a virtue for which there would never be any recognition or reward. Brother was agitated about many things. If the two guiding principles of the universe were paranoia, the belief that the world had meaning, but that meaning was located at a concealed level, which was very possibly hostile to the overt absurd level, which meant in brief you, and entropy, the belief that life was meaningless, that things fell apart, and the heat death of the universe was inevitable, then he was definitely in the paranoid camp. If Quichotte's craziness was leading him to run toward his doom, then Brother's anxieties were close to triggering a flight response. He wanted to run, but didn't know where or how, which made him more fearful still, because he knew that in his spy fiction, he had already told himself the answer. You can run, but you can't hide.
Answers questions. Oh, so then it gets really strange. So there's some questions here, but let me say two or three things about it, and if anybody wants to jump in about anything, please do. It's very difficult to write a book which wants to be realistic at the same time as not being. That's to say, I've always thought the use of surrealism in literature depends on it being rooted very deeply in the real world. And if it doesn't have those roots, then it just becomes whimsical, and if anything can happen, then nothing has any emotional affect. So it's a balancing act, trying to make things, people and events, feel rooted in reality while they're actually bizarre. Anyway, that was the difficulty of the book, and I was quite scared writing it a lot of the time because I wasn't sure that I was going to be able to do that. And fortunately, a couple of things I'd read a very long time ago bubbled up from some recess of my strange brain and helped me. I mean, there's a short story I'd read as a teenager at school, science fiction short story called Pictures Don't Lie by Catherine MacLean. Wonderful story. If you haven't read it, go find it. And there was a certain moment when I didn't know how to bring these two storylines, the Brother storyline and the Quichotte storyline, how to bring them so close that they seem to connect and become like the same storyline. And I knew I had to do it, and I didn't know how to do it. And then I remembered this story, and I can't tell you about it without spoiling the ending, but it actually showed me how to do it. And I thought, oh, my 15-year-old self just came to the rescue of my 72-year-old self, and it felt very satisfying. I mean, storytelling is a strange thing because you don't have to tell a story from the beginning to the middle to the end. What you have to do is tell the story in exactly the way that the reader needs to hear it. There's always a moment at which you have to work out what is the next thing the reader needs to know, and then what's the next thing. And that doesn't have to be linear time, it doesn't have to be the same place. But if you can get that right, then people enjoy the book. If they don't, you don't. You want to say anything about those people you've been reading aloud, or you don't care about them?
No, I care about them. Yeah. I had fun.
Yeah.
I'd rather hear you talk about it.
That's passing the buck. Well, all right, here. Why this book? Why now? All right, well, that's a good question. That's good, two questions. Well, the first answer to that is my previous novel, Golden House, took place almost entirely on the island of Manhattan. Didn't get to Brooklyn, I don't think. I don't recall there be even a paragraph in Brooklyn. You have to forget that. But I remember when I finished the book, telling myself, next time you have to leave town. You can't just do this again. And so quite early on, long before I knew the story of this book, I had the idea of writing a book that left town, that went out across this enormous country and saw what it would see. And actually, for a moment, I thought it would not be a fictional book. I thought it might be a non-fiction book. I thought I might actually go on a journey across the country and just see what happened. Just put myself in the place and let it happen to me. And even to the point that I talked to my then 20-year-old son, slightly older than Sancho, and said, would he like to go on the road with me? And he said, yes. He said, but Dad, are you going to drive? I said, yeah, I'm going to drive. He said, no, I don't think you're going to drive. And I said, well, how about if you drive? He said, yeah, then I'm in. So anyway, so we had that plan, but then what happened was I read Don Quixote. And the reason I read it is because it was coming up for this big anniversary of Cervantes and Shakespeare, and I'd been asked to write something about it. And so when I started rereading that great book, I thought, I don't want to go on this journey, I want to make it up. It'll be more enjoyable to make it up. And so that's how it turned into a novel. And then this second storyline, the author storyline, I really hadn't been planning to write at all. I mean, that was no part of the original conception of the book. It just showed up. It showed up on the page, and I didn't know if it was a good idea or a bad idea. I just thought I'm going to try this, and I reserve the right to remove it if I don't like it. And then the more I got into it, the two storylines started interacting and I hope illuminating each other, etc. And then I thought, okay, I think I'm going to have to stick with this. So why now? I mean, why not now? I'm interested in books that try to take on the present moment, which is a risky thing. It's a thing you're taught not to do. Unfortunately, some of you may have the misfortune to be learning creative writing. I never had that misfortune. And so I was never told that you have to wait for some distance so you could have perspective and objectivity, etc. Nobody told me that. I think it's dangerous because if you do it wrong, then what you're writing is as quickly out of date as yesterday's newspapers. But if you do it right, you can do something like capturing a moment. And the metaphor I always have used for myself is one of Hemingway's bullfighting books. I can't remember which one now. He says the great matador works closest to the bull. That's to say, if the bull's over there, you're not in much danger. But if the bull is brushing your thigh as it goes past, then if you make the slightest false move, you've got a horn in your side, And I've always thought that thing about working up against the present moment is that. It's working close to the bull. If you get it wrong, you're dead. If you get it right, everybody applauds. So it's a risk, but it's a good risk. How did I approach writing sickness in this book? Oh gosh, Well, one of the things about this book is that many of the leading characters are in some way seriously unwell. Two of them have cancer, different kinds, or are in some kind of remission from cancer. You heard about Salma having bipolar condition and having to have ECT, and so on. And Quichotte, as we've already established, is sort of borderline deranged, or maybe not even borderline. And I don't know quite why that happened. All these characters seem to be broken and damaged in some way. And then I got interested in exploring the ways in which they were broken and damaged. And I don't think you can have an approach to writing sickness. You just write it. You just try and make it truthful. I mean, I always have liked that the thing that Susan Sontag said in Illness as Metaphor, when she said, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but she said, illness is not a metaphor, it's an illness. So if you write about illness, write about it as an illness. Don't write about it as an allegory of something else. And I think that is advice that I took. And yeah, I think that's probably as much as I can say about that. What is it like to hear these characters in the voices of these actors? After hearing it in your head for so long. I mean, on the outside, it's fantastic because to see words that you've written being brought to life by the talents of other people is kind of exciting, it's exciting. And I've had it, I mean, this tonight is special having these three wonderful readers here. And I've had it a couple of times before when I've done readings or I've done events where somebody's read from my book, and it's always been very, very exciting. So I'm for it. I mean, I just get to sit here, and they get to do the work. So that seems to be more of that, please. Why is magic realism more necessary as a genre today than ever before? Well, first of all, I have a little difficulty with the term magic realism because it seems to me that term belongs and is owned by a particular group of Latin American writers from the late 50s to the early 70s, of whom the great figures are Garcia Marquez and Vargas Llosa, but many others. They kind of had a project. I mean, they in the way that the French surrealists had a project. That they had a theory and they were trying to put it into practice about how to represent reality by surreal means. And I actually think magic realism, Latin American version, and French surrealism, and 1970s American fabulism, they're all the same thing. They just have different names in different countries. And so I'd prefer to leave the term magic realism in South America because I think it belongs there. What I think is that there's been, throughout the history of literature, every so often, in every language, there are people who write in this way, who use non-realistic techniques to try and tell the truth about human nature and about society. Kafka, I mean, Kafka's a magic realist if you want to use that language. Man wakes up in the morning and discovers he's been transformed into a giant insect. That's, not kitchen sink naturalism. Bulgakov, the Master and Margarita, the devil shows up in Moscow and creates havoc and has as sidekicks a cat with a pair of 6 guns who can shoot the pips out of the ace of spades. And another character who is so thin that when he turns sideways, he disappears. You see what I mean? People do this all over the place. And all right, here's what I'd say. The realist novel, the great realist novel of the 19th century, is based on the foundation of an agreement between the writer and the reader about the nature of reality. That if you're Balzac or Stendhal or Zola, you can assume that your readers have basically the same view of the world as you do. And on that foundation, you can build realism. When that agreement breaks down, the foundation is eroded. When reality becomes disputed, when it becomes contested, when one man's truth is another man's lie, one man's hero is another man's villain, it becomes much more problematic to write a realistic novel because nobody can agree on what that word means anymore. And so then you have to use other tricks. You have to use other techniques. And that's, I think, the reason why this kind of writing, for me, is more, I don't try to prescribe to other writers, but for me, it's necessary because of that erosion of the agreement about the real world. You were shortlisted for the Man Booker. Let me say, first of all, it's not called the Man Booker anymore, because the Man group that used to sponsor it is no longer sponsoring it. So it's just the Booker Prize now, which it always should have been. Do those kinds of accolades still wow you? Yeah. I mean, you may think it's every day, but actually the last time I was shortlisted for the Booker was 24 years ago. So it doesn't feel like boring. It feels like quite cool. And what took them so long? No, I think the great thing is that anything that helps your book find its readers is worth it. And the thing about these big prizes, like the Booker and the Goncourt and the National Book Award and so on, are that they may persuade people who would not normally think to pick up a book of yours to say, okay, I'll have a go. It sounds, people like it, seems interesting, And that, I mean, I'm deeply in favor of that, to find a way of getting the book out there to as many readers as it can reach, So that's the thing about it. I mean, I think she wouldn't mind me saying it. I had a very funny email exchange with Margaret Atwood yesterday. I mean, she's a really old friend of mine. I've known her for so long that it doesn't need to be mentioned. I wrote to her and I said, so I see that we're both summoned to literary Rubber Chicken Night this year, and look forward to seeing you there. And she wrote back and said, yes, I think we're nominated in the category of still ambulatory old poops. And they'll probably give it to some young up-and-coming person. She said, but we can still dance. She said, there's a dance in the old girl yet. And I thought that was really a lovely letter to receive. So I agreed that we would meet at the Guildhall in October and dance. I mean, we both won it. That doesn't mean we don't want to win it again. So there we are. If you have anybody you could bribe them now. When you write the only antidote to human misery is love, what do you think love can cure? Oh, everything? Cancer? No, I mean, I think you have to think about what there is in human life that is most valuable in a human life. And to my mind, that's it. And the kind of love that the book is talking about, by the way, is not only, or maybe not even primarily, romantic love. I mean, romantic love in the novel is treated almost comically in the form of what we were reading, this old coot obsessed with this distant, unknown woman, And for most of the novel, it's treated comically, and then towards the end of the novel, it becomes different. But the other forms of love, which are very central in the book, which are love inside families, love between fathers and sons, love between brothers and sisters, love which can be damaged in this very diasporic moment where families can be separated by thousands of miles and by oceans and so on, and that can create distances, in what would otherwise be a loving relationship. Or there can be wrongs done or imagined between people, which also make people who should love each other be distant from each other. And so in the book, there's two different father and son relationships. There's two different brother and sister relationships. And they're, in a way, to me, they're the emotional heart of the book. You know, there's all this playfulness and fun kind of around it, but the heart of the book are these people trying to come back together and to rediscover a love which has been damaged or lost or mislaid. And that's what the book is talking. When it talks about love, it's talking about all of that. That there are many, many kinds of love, of which romantic love is only one kind. You know, and if you are lucky enough to have a life in which all those things are there, then that's a rich life. That's a rich life. That's it. Anybody got any more questions? Otherwise, we'll stop. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.